The neighborhood had always been quiet, the kind of place where people waved when they passed each other and small talk was easy. Lawns were well kept, driveways clean, and houses lined up neatly along the streets, each one a reflection of the owner's personality. Most residents liked it that way. They enjoyed the calm, the sense of safety, and the knowledge that their community ran smoothly. Life moved at a steady pace here, and for the most part, everyone respected each other's space. Among these houses, there was one that stood out slightly, not because it was bigger or fancier, but because it belonged to a man who carried a presence of quiet strength. He was a 70-year-old veteran, a man who had served his country with honor and returned home with a calmness that could only come from years of discipline. His neighbors knew him as polite, approachable, and always willing to lend a hand. He tended to his garden carefully, mowed his lawn on weekends, and greeted everyone with a nod or a smile. There was a certain rhythm to his life, the kind that made people feel safe without realizing why. The man had retired decades ago, but his military training remained part of who he was. He moved through the world with a sense of order and awareness. Even in simple things like arranging his books or tools, there was a meticulousness that reflected his past. Not many people in the neighborhood knew the details of his service, though some had heard snippets, stories of deployments, long nights under pressure, and the quiet courage required to serve in challenging situations. It wasn't the kind of thing he boasted about. He had seen enough of the world to understand the value of humility. Life was peaceful until the HOA board became a more prominent part of the neighborhood dynamic. Homeowners associations had always existed, but lately they seemed to have grown stricter. Rules about lawn heights, decorations, and even the colors of front doors were enforced with almost a rigid intensity. Some residents didn't mind, believing rules kept property values stable, while others quietly grumbled about the level of oversight. The veteran had never had a real conflict with the HOA. He followed the rules because it made sense to do so, not because anyone was watching him closely. That was until Karen became involved. Karen, a woman in her 50s, had moved into the neighborhood a few years ago. She had a strong personality and a sharp sense of what she believed was right, but there was a tendency in her to push rules further than most people would. She could notice the tiniest imperfection and felt compelled to correct it. Where other people might let a minor infraction slide, she saw it as her duty to intervene. Many neighbors had learned to avoid conflict with her, but they also whispered about her extreme sense of authority. At first, the veteran barely noticed Karen. She would make comments during neighborhood meetings, asking about minor issues, and he would nod politely, answering her questions with civility. But soon Karen began to take a more personal interest in him. It started with small remarks about his garden. She complained about a decorative statue that she claimed violated HOA rules. The veteran smiled and explained that the statue was within the guidelines, even showing her the official documents. Karen seemed momentarily satisfied, but returned later with a new complaint about a slightly overgrown patch of grass near the driveway. The veteran handled it calmly. He trimmed the grass and made a note to pay closer attention to any areas Karen might object to. He understood that people had their ways and he preferred to avoid conflict. After all, he had faced real dangers in his past, and petty neighborhood disputes seemed trivial by comparison. He assumed this would pass with time, but Karen was relentless. She began sending letters and emails, each one more aggressive than the last. She accused him of rule violations, demanded corrections, and hinted at fines. Some of the language was threatening, though not illegal, and she seemed to enjoy asserting control over neighbors she considered careless or disrespectful. The veteran read each letter carefully, maintaining calm. He responded politely, clarifying that he was following the rules and documenting every interaction. Neighbors began noticing the tension. Some whispered about the growing feud, while others quietly hoped it wouldn't escalate further. The veteran's quiet dignity made an impression on many. People admired the way he handled himself, never raising his voice, never resorting to threats or rudeness. But there was also a sense of worry. A few neighbors had experienced Karen's interventions firsthand and knew that she could push situations far beyond what seemed reasonable. Despite this, the veteran continued his daily routines. He would wake up early, tend to his garden, and walk along the sidewalks, greeting whoever he met. He found solace in the familiar rhythm of his life. The sun rising over the lawns, the sound of birds in the trees, and the occasional hum of a lawnmower were comforting. He enjoyed small interactions with neighbors, a chat about the weather, a shared joke about a pet, or a brief discussion about a neighborhood event. These moments grounded him, reminding him that life could remain normal even amid irritation. Yet the stress of dealing with Karen began to grow. Even though he remained calm, the constant scrutiny and minor attacks started to wear on him. He knew that if the situation escalated, he needed a plan. His military training had taught him discipline, patience, and the importance of preparation. He began to document everything more thoroughly, taking photos of his yard, keeping copies of every letter, and noting the dates and times of interactions. He knew that evidence could be crucial if matters ever went beyond simple complaints. Karen, meanwhile, seemed to thrive on the conflict. She would linger near his property, watch his movements, and make comments to neighbors about her perceived mission to enforce the rules. Some residents were uncomfortable with her intensity, but few dared to confront her directly. She carried herself with confidence, believing she was protecting the community. In her mind, the veteran's minor infractions were a threat to order, and she was determined to correct them. For the veteran, the challenge was not just about the rules, it was about maintaining peace while standing firm. He had faced far greater threats in his life, and he knew that losing composure could create unnecessary problems. He relied on his experience to guide him, approaching each encounter with calm and clarity. He treated every letter, every complaint, and every visit with careful attention, ensuring that he could respond thoughtfully rather than react emotionally. As days turned into weeks, the tension grew. Karen's focus on him intensified, and small annoyances began to accumulate. She would call meetings or send emails demanding explanations. She would question neighbors who interacted with him, trying to reinforce her authority. The veteran remained unfazed outwardly, but inside he recognized that the situation required vigilance. The calm neighborhood he had enjoyed for years now carried an undercurrent of unease. The veteran's family was aware of the growing tension. They encouraged him to remain patient and to rely on his documentation, reminding him that he had nothing to fear if he stayed composed. They visited often, offering support and helping with practical matters. The veteran appreciated their presence, finding comfort in knowing that he was not alone. He also reflected on the irony. After serving his country and facing dangers in distant lands, he was now confronted by a challenge as strange as it was petty, an overzealous HOA member who underestimated him entirely. Life in the neighborhood continued, a mix of ordinary routines and subtle conflicts. The veteran remained focused on his daily habits, tending his garden, maintaining his home, and enjoying small moments of peace. Yet the tension with Karen lingered, an invisible pressure that kept him alert. He knew that eventually the situation might escalate further, and he prepared himself for that possibility. In the midst of it all, the veteran's character shone. His patience, discipline, and quiet strength became evident not just to his family, but to neighbors who observed him. He had learned the value of standing firm without aggression, of responding to conflict with intelligence rather than anger. In a world that often rewards loud voices and quick reactions, he exemplified the power of calm resolve. Karen, on the other hand, continued her efforts with fervor. She seemed blind to the fact that her actions were pushing the boundaries of civility. She believed she was justified, motivated by rules and a sense of authority, but she had no understanding of the depth of experience and skill she was challenging. For the veteran, it was a matter of time before this difference in perspective would come to a head, a test of patience, preparation, and quiet strength. The story of this quiet neighborhood, of a veteran and a relentless HOA member, was just beginning. The veteran knew that peace could be maintained, but only with awareness, careful planning, and the calm application of principles learned over a lifetime of service. For now he watched, listened, and prepared, ready to respond if the situation escalated. The quiet of the streets and the calm of the mornings belied the tension building beneath the surface, a tension that would soon reach a point where ordinary civility met extraordinary resolve. Even as he went about his simple daily tasks, the veteran could feel the eyes of the neighborhood observing, noting the subtle clash of personalities. He remained unshaken, confident in his approach and in his ability to handle challenges with dignity. It was not a life in the neighborhood continued much as it always had, with mornings filled with the quiet hum of routine. Birds chirped in the trees, sprinklers hissed across well-kept lawns, and the occasional car drove slowly down the streets. Yet for the veteran, the peaceful rhythm of daily life was starting to feel increasingly complicated. Karen, the overzealous HOA member, had shifted from sending letters to making more frequent and invasive appearances. At first, it was subtle. She would walk by the veteran's property during the day, often pausing to peer at the garden, counting the number of flowers or examining the alignment of the tools in his shed. Sometimes she would stop to ask questions, always framed in the language of concern for community standards. She wanted to know why a certain plant had grown taller than she deemed acceptable, or why a decorative stone was slightly out of line. The veteran would respond calmly, explaining that everything was within the HOA rules. He even showed her measurements and referenced official guidelines, but she seemed unsatisfied with facts. Neighbors began to notice her increasingly frequent visits. Some exchanged nervous glances when they saw her lingering near the veteran's property. Others whispered quietly among themselves, expressing concern over what they perceived as harassment. While Karen believed she was doing the right thing, there was a growing sense that she was pushing the limits of decency. The veteran remained polite and composed, but it was clear that this was beginning to wear on him. The veteran's family, aware of Karen's persistence, urged him to stay cautious. They reminded him that while he had lived through far more dangerous situations, the subtleties of domestic confrontation required attention and careful handling. He listened, appreciative of their concern, and made sure to document every interaction. Photographs of the yard, copies of letters and emails, and notes about every visit from Karen became part of a growing record. He understood that documentation could protect him if the situation escalated. One afternoon, Karen arrived at his property earlier than usual. She carried a clipboard and wore a determined expression, as if she had a mission that needed immediate completion. The veteran noticed her from the window and prepared himself mentally. He greeted her politely, offering a simple nod. Karen, however, wasted no time. She started pointing out perceived violations, minor details that any reasonable person would overlook. A slightly uneven row of plants, a shadow over the walkway, a garden tool that was leaning in the wrong direction. Each point was presented as a serious offense, and her voice carried an edge that made it clear she expected obedience. The veteran listened patiently, his mind calm despite the rising tension. He responded clearly and politely, explaining each situation, referencing the HOA guidelines, and demonstrating that nothing was out of compliance. Karen's expression shifted between annoyance and frustration, but she refused to accept his explanations. For her, control and enforcement were more important than facts or reason. Neighbors walking by could hear snippets of the conversation, and a few paused to observe. Some whispered words of encouragement to the veteran, appreciating the calm and measured way he handled the situation. Others watched silently, unsure whether to intervene or remain detached. The scene was a quiet drama unfolding in the middle of an ordinary day, a clash of personalities that highlighted the different ways people approach conflict. Karen's persistence escalated over the next few weeks. Letters became more frequent with sharper tones and hints of fines. Phone calls followed in which she repeated her points and pressed for compliance. She seemed almost obsessed with proving that the veteran was in violation of the rules, despite clear evidence to the contrary. While most residents would have become frustrated or angry, the veteran maintained his composure. He understood that responding emotionally would give her power, and he was determined not to grant it. At home, he reviewed his records carefully. He noted every visit, every email, and every phone call. He took photos of his garden, labeling each one with the date and time. He even created a simple log of interactions, detailing what was said and how he responded. While it was tedious work, he found a sense of control in maintaining a complete record. It reminded him that he could manage the situation through careful preparation, patience, and adherence to the rules. One day, Karen's approach became more aggressive. She showed up unannounced, insisting on conducting an inspection of his property. The veteran opened the door politely but firmly, asking her to explain the purpose of her visit. Karen insisted that it was part of her duty to enforce the HOA rules. She moved closer to the house, pointing out imagined infractions and demanding immediate correction. Her tone was insistent, bordering on hostile, yet the veteran remained composed. He spoke calmly, explaining once again that everything was in compliance. He offered to provide documentation, showing measurements and guidelines, but Karen dismissed it. She seemed determined to assert her authority, no matter how baseless her claims might be. Her focus on minor details, combined with her refusal to listen, created a palpable tension in the air. The veteran, aware of the situation's escalation, prepared himself for the possibility that this confrontation might continue for longer than usual. Meanwhile, neighbors continued to observe. Some were concerned, wondering if Karen might overstep even further. Others were impressed by the veteran's calm demeanor, seeing in him a sense of dignity and patience that contrasted sharply with Karen's agitation. Quietly, the community began discussing the situation. A few residents offered advice or sympathy, but most simply watched, uncertain about how to intervene without causing additional conflict. The veteran also considered the safety of his property. He reviewed the home's security measures, ensuring that doors were locked and cameras were positioned to record any unusual activity. He did not intend to provoke Karen, but he understood that documentation and preparation were important for protecting himself. This was not about fear, it was about foresight. Having faced dangerous situations before, he knew the value of anticipating problems and preparing responses in advance. Despite the tension, the veteran tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. He continued to tend his garden, enjoying the small pleasures of nurturing plants and arranging his space according to his taste. He walked the neighborhood in the early mornings, greeting neighbors and exchanging small talk. These routines provided stability and reminded him that life was larger than the petty conflicts with Karen. Maintaining this balance required discipline, patience, and mental focus, all skills he had developed over decades of service. Karen's behavior, however, grew more intrusive. She began asking neighbors about his routines, trying to gather information to strengthen her case. She would question people who interacted with him, subtly encouraging them to support her complaints. This created a quiet sense of unease in the neighborhood, with some residents feeling pressure to take sides. The veteran, aware of this, chose not to engage with these indirect tactics. He focused on what he could control: his own behavior, his home, and his documentation. The veteran also reflected on the absurdity of the situation. After a lifetime of serious challenges, from demanding military missions to facing unpredictable circumstances, he found himself dealing with the relentless scrutiny of a single neighbor. He recognized the irony but did not allow it to frustrate him. Instead, he used it as a reminder of the importance of calm, measured responses. This approach, he knew, would protect him more effectively than anger or confrontation. One afternoon, Karen arrived with another complaint, this time about the positioning of the lawn chairs on the patio. She insisted that they were in violation of the HOA's rules, even though they were clearly within the allowed space. The veteran greeted her politely, listening carefully to each point. He explained the measurements, showed the documentation, and clarified that everything complied with the guidelines. Karen seemed unconcerned with evidence, focusing instead on asserting her authority. Neighbors passing by took note of the interaction. Some shook their heads, surprised by the intensity of the situation. Others quietly admired the veteran's composure, recognizing the patience required to deal with such persistence. The contrast between the veteran's calm demeanor and Karen's aggressive enforcement created a subtle drama in the neighborhood, one that drew attention without loud confrontation. As days passed, the veteran continued to prepare for the possibility of further escalation. He reviewed his security systems, ensured that all communication was documented, and maintained detailed logs of interactions. This preparation was not born of fear but of experience. He knew that planning, patience, and composure were the best defenses against unreasonable behavior. By remaining calm and organized, he retained control over a situation that could easily become chaotic. Throughout all of this, the veteran's family provided quiet support. They visited often, helping with small tasks and offering reassurance. Their presence reminded him that he was not alone, and it strengthened his resolve. The family recognized the unusual challenge posed by Karen and encouraged him to continue relying on his calm, measured approach. Together, they navigated the tension, emphasizing preparation and patience over confrontation. Karen's persistence, however, showed no sign of fading. The tension in the neighborhood had been simmering for weeks, almost like a storm gathering strength before breaking. The veteran continued his daily routines with careful discipline, tending his garden, walking along the quiet streets, and maintaining his home. Yet despite his efforts to stay calm and measured, Karen's presence loomed over him like a shadow, growing more intrusive with each passing day. It began one late morning when the veteran was organizing his tools in the garage. He had been planning a small project, fixing the porch railing that had loosened over the winter. The sunlight streamed through the windows, and for a moment everything felt normal. That calm was shattered when a knock sounded on the front door, sharp, insistent, and impatient. He opened the door to find Karen standing there, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowing as if inspecting every inch of his property before even speaking. "Good morning," she said, though her tone lacked warmth. "I'm here to inspect your yard. Some issues have been reported, and I need to see them for myself." The veteran blinked, surprised by her boldness. "I'm happy to discuss any concerns," he replied calmly. "But you are aware this is my private property. I would appreciate it if you contacted me before entering." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't about permission," she said firmly. "It's about ensuring compliance with HOA rules. I am required to inspect." She stepped forward as if the words alone gave her the right to cross the threshold. The veteran stood his ground. He had encountered people who underestimated him before, but Karen seemed entirely unaware of what she was up against. "I can show you everything from here," he said. "All measurements and layouts are within the rules. I can provide documentation if needed." Karen waved her hand impatiently as if waving away his explanation was enough. "I need to see it myself. I have reports to follow up on, and I intend to do my job." At that moment, the veteran realized that she was prepared to cross the line. Her tone and body language made it clear that she was no longer interested in conversation. She wanted control. He stepped back slightly, not in fear but in measured strategy, giving her space while keeping a clear view of her movements. The first few minutes were tense silence. Karen walked slowly, examining the porch, the garden, and even the walkway. She tapped her pen against her clipboard, muttering under her breath about rules, guidelines, and alleged infractions. The veteran followed her calmly, maintaining a neutral expression. He knew that any sign of anger or fear could escalate the situation further. As she turned toward the backyard, she stepped closer to the door, glancing over the fence at neighboring properties. "Your plants are out of alignment," she said, pointing at a row of flowers. "This violates the landscaping rules." The veteran bent slightly to show her the measurements, explaining carefully that the spacing complied with the HOA standards. He demonstrated with a simple tape measure, showing that each plant was placed correctly. Karen's eyes flicked over the measurements, but she did not acknowledge the accuracy. Instead, she shook her head and moved on, focusing on something else entirely: a small decorative rock near the walkway. This pattern continued, with Karen moving from point to point, ignoring evidence and documentation, determined to assert authority at every turn. The veteran remained calm, answering each question, showing each measurement, and keeping a careful record of the interaction. His military training allowed him to remain composed, aware of every movement, tone, and subtle gesture. He understood that patience was a weapon, and he wielded it silently. Neighbors who had grown accustomed to observing these encounters from a distance began to gather quietly along the street. Some whispered to each other, impressed by the veteran's composure and shaken by Karen's audacity. Others simply watched, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of the conflict. The quiet street had become a stage for a drama that no one had anticipated, and every passerby seemed to feel the tension without knowing exactly why. After nearly 20 minutes of inspection, Karen moved toward the front porch again, standing just inside the entryway. She crossed a boundary without asking, stepping closer than was polite or legal. The veteran calmly asked her to step back, pointing out that she had entered private property without permission. Her expression hardened and she refused, insisting that her duty allowed her to be there. The veteran raised his voice slightly, not in anger but in firm authority. "Ma'am, you are on private property. I will ask you one more time to step back. I am happy to discuss this outside, but I cannot allow unauthorized entry." Karen froze for a moment, taken aback by his assertiveness. For the first time, she seemed to sense that he was not an ordinary neighbor. Yet she did not retreat. Instead, she attempted to assert herself further, leaning forward slightly and raising her voice to match his. At that instant, the situation reached a critical point. The veteran, with decades of experience in high-pressure situations, assessed the risk and prepared mentally. He did not act aggressively, but his posture and tone conveyed that he was ready to defend his home. Karen, unaware of his background, continued to push, oblivious to the fact that she was facing someone trained in discipline, strategy, and calm confrontation. He stepped slightly to the side, opening a line of sight to the camera he had installed for security. "For both of our safety," he said, "I'm recording this interaction. Please step back." His voice was steady, clear, and unwavering. Karen paused, her confidence faltering slightly as the reality of documentation and legal consequences became apparent. The veteran's composure never wavered. He calmly explained that all rules were being followed, that he had documentation for every aspect of the property, and that harassment or unauthorized entry could have legal consequences. Karen hesitated, sensing that the situation was no longer entirely in her control. But she did not immediately leave. At that moment, a neighbor who had been watching from across the street called out softly, "Is everything okay?" The veteran nodded politely, maintaining calm, and Karen spun toward the voice, momentarily distracted. The brief lapse in her focus gave him the chance to assert control without aggression. He guided her to the edge of the property, asking her politely but firmly to respect boundaries. Karen protested, muttering about duties and authority, but the veteran remained patient. He did not shout or make threats. Instead, he explained the importance of rules, consent, and respect for personal space. Each word was deliberate, measured, and designed to maintain peace while asserting control. Eventually, after nearly an hour of inspection, Karen began to step back. Her frustration was visible, but she had been forced to acknowledge the veteran's composure and preparedness. She left reluctantly, muttering complaints under her breath, and the veteran watched her go, calmly returning to his daily routine. Inside the house, he took a moment to reflect. The situation had escalated to a level he had anticipated, and his preparation had made the difference. He had remained calm, documented everything, and maintained control without aggression. He understood that Karen's persistence might continue, but he also knew that he had established boundaries clearly and effectively. He reviewed the security footage, noting every detail of the encounter. The neighbor's observations were added to his records, and he made notes for future interactions. Even in the midst of tension, he found satisfaction in the effectiveness of patience, preparation, and calm authority. The incident had tested his resolve, but he had met the challenge without losing composure or dignity. In the following days, the neighborhood buzzed quietly about the encounter. Residents who had observed the confrontation spoke in hushed tones about the veteran's calm and controlled manner. Some expressed admiration for the way he handled a difficult and persistent individual. Others worried about what might come next, recognizing that Karen was unlikely to abandon her sense of authority easily. The veteran, however, remained focused on routine. He continued tending his garden, walking the streets, and maintaining his home. He kept meticulous records of every interaction with Karen, ensuring that if the situation escalated further, he would have a solid foundation of documentation. He understood that preparation, awareness, and calm strategy were more powerful than anger or impulsive action. His family continued to visit, providing support and reassurance. They helped with minor tasks, discussed strategies for dealing with Karen, and reminded him that patience and discipline were his greatest strengths. Their presence was comforting, reinforcing the veteran's confidence that he could manage the situation effectively. Karen, meanwhile, continued to send letters and make phone calls. Each one carried the same tone of insistence and authority, but the veteran responded with the same calm diligence. He did not allow her words to provoke anger. Instead, he answered each complaint clearly, politely, and with reference to documented rules and measurements. The dynamic had shifted slightly. He had established a presence of calm authority that Karen could not easily ignore. As the days passed, the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. The tension remained, but it was no longer chaotic. The veteran's preparedness and calm approach had established boundaries that Karen had to acknowledge, even if reluctantly. Neighbors continued to observe quietly, some offering support, others simply watching the unfolding drama. The incident The tension in the neighborhood had reached a level that the veteran had anticipated, but still felt unsettling. Karen had grown more brazen with each passing week, and the veteran knew that her persistence would eventually push the situation into a direct confrontation. He had prepared carefully for this possibility, documenting everything, reviewing security footage, and remaining vigilant without letting fear dictate his actions. It started one late afternoon when the sun was low and the streets were quiet. The veteran was in his home office reviewing some personal letters when he heard a persistent knocking at the front door. It was not the casual, polite knock of a neighbor. It was insistent, almost demanding. He looked up and saw Karen standing there, her clipboard in hand, her expression tight and determined. He opened the door calmly. "Good afternoon," he said in a neutral tone. "How can I help you today?" Karen stepped forward without waiting for an invitation. "I need to inspect your backyard immediately," she said, her voice sharp. "Reports have come in about violations, and I must confirm them." The veteran paused for a moment, measuring the situation. Karen was crossing a boundary that had already been made clear in previous encounters. Her insistence on entering his property without permission was a violation, and he recognized that this moment would require both firmness and strategy. "I've told you before," he said calmly. "You are not allowed to enter my property without prior permission. I am happy to show you anything from here, or we can review documentation together outside, but I cannot allow unauthorized entry." Karen's eyes narrowed. "This is my duty," she said. "You are required to comply." She took another step forward, clearly testing how far she could push. The veteran's military training, honed over decades of service, kicked in. He knew how to assess risk quickly, how to maintain composure in tense situations, and how to assert authority without escalating into physical confrontation. He did not move aggressively, but his posture and tone conveyed control. "I am aware of my duties," he said steadily, "and I am aware of mine. Trespassing on private property is not part of your duty. Please step back." Karen's persistence was fueled by her confidence and ignorance. She had no idea who she was confronting. The veteran had served in special operations, trained for high-pressure situations, and had faced far greater threats than an overzealous neighbor. His experience had taught him patience, discipline, and the value of measured responses. He remained calm, aware of every movement, every subtle shift in tone, and every possible outcome. For a moment, Karen paused, seemingly taken aback by his firm stance. She had expected compliance, not resistance. The veteran, sensing her hesitation, continued to speak in a calm, even tone. "I will not engage in a dispute over minor rules violations while my property is being trespassed upon. If you wish to continue, we can do so outside, with proper permission, or through written correspondence." Karen's frustration was visible. She muttered under her breath, trying to regain control of the situation. But the veteran's calm authority was undeniable. He stood firmly, silent confidence radiating from him, a stark contrast to her agitation. Neighbors, who had been quietly observing from a distance, began to notice the unusual tension at the veteran's front door. Some whispered to each other, expressing surprise at the level of composure the veteran displayed. Others simply watched, realizing that this was no ordinary neighborhood conflict. The veteran had created a controlled environment, asserting boundaries without aggression, and maintaining dignity in the face of provocation. Karen, unwilling to retreat, attempted a different approach. She raised her voice, trying to intimidate him with authority and insistence. "You cannot refuse an inspection. The HOA rules require compliance." The veteran did not flinch. He responded calmly but firmly. "I am within my rights to deny entry to anyone without prior permission. That includes HOA members. Compliance does not include trespassing." Her insistence began to falter as she realized that he was not intimidated. He stood with quiet confidence, aware of her tactics and prepared for any escalation. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. Karen's aggression was met with calm authority, and for the first time she seemed uncertain. The veteran continued, his voice steady and deliberate. "I have documentation showing that all aspects of my property comply with HOA rules. I am happy to provide this information at any time, but unauthorized entry will not be tolerated." The mention of documentation seemed to make Karen pause. She realized that her actions were being recorded, both in writing and through the security system he had in place. This knowledge, combined with his composed demeanor, began to break the confidence she had relied on to assert control. At that moment, a neighbor stepped out from across the street speaking softly, but firmly. "Is everything okay here?" The veteran nodded politely. "Yes, thank you," he replied. "I am simply requesting that private property boundaries be respected." Karen turned sharply toward the neighbor, clearly annoyed by the presence of witnesses. For a moment she seemed uncertain how to proceed. The veteran remained calm, aware that the neighbor's observation reinforced his position. He continued to speak in a measured tone, emphasizing the importance of respect, consent, and documentation. "You may think this is a minor issue," he said, "but trespassing is serious. I am happy to discuss compliance, but only in a respectful and lawful manner." Karen hesitated, her confidence shaken. She had assumed that her persistence alone would force compliance. But the veteran's composed response, combined with visible evidence and the presence of witnesses, had created a situation she could not easily dominate. Realizing that her immediate tactics were ineffective, she muttered something about needing to report back and turned to leave. The veteran watched her go, maintaining calm and observing her movements carefully. He did not follow or speak aggressively. He understood that control could be maintained without confrontation, and that patience was his greatest advantage. Once she had gone, the veteran took a moment to review his records and security footage. Every interaction had been captured, every movement noted, and every word documented. He had prepared for situations like this, and his preparation had paid off. The encounter had tested his patience, discipline, and ability to assert boundaries, and he had passed without resorting to anger or aggression. His family, who had been keeping in touch, expressed concern and admiration. They praised his calm approach and reminded him that his training and experience had given him the tools to handle difficult situations effectively. The veteran reflected on the encounter, noting the importance of awareness, preparation, and composure. He knew that Karen's persistence might continue, but he also knew that he could maintain control as long as he remained calm and measured. Neighbors continued to observe quietly, some offering words of support, others simply watching the unfolding situation. The veteran's calm demeanor had become a visible example of how to handle persistent challenges with dignity and strategy. Karen's overzealousness had been met with a combination of patience, documentation, and firm boundaries, a demonstration of authority grounded in preparation rather than aggression. Over the following days, the veteran continued his routines. He tended his garden, walked the streets, and maintained his home. He also reviewed his security systems, ensuring that cameras were positioned correctly and that documentation was thorough. He prepared for any future interactions, knowing that awareness and preparation were key to managing the ongoing tension. Karen, meanwhile, seemed slightly unsettled. Her usual confidence had been shaken by the veteran's calm response and the visible documentation of the encounter. She continued her efforts, but there was a subtle difference in her approach. Less overt aggression, more cautious observation. The balance of power had shifted, though the veteran remained vigilant, understanding that persistence could still lead to escalation. The neighborhood, once quiet and ordinary, now carried an invisible tension. Residents observed the subtle interactions, aware that a conflict was ongoing but uncertain how it would unfold. The veteran's calm authority contrasted sharply with Karen's persistence, creating a dynamic that was both tense and quietly compelling. For the veteran, the encounter reinforced key lessons from his past. Patience, preparation, and composure were powerful tools, capable of managing even persistent challenges. Documentation, awareness, and measured responses could protect him without escalating conflict. And, most importantly, understanding boundaries, both personal and legal, was essential in maintaining control over situations that might otherwise feel overwhelming. Life in the neighborhood continued, with birdsong, sprinklers, and passing cars maintaining the appearance of normalcy. Yet beneath the surface, the tension between Karen's persistence and the veteran's composed authority simmered. It was a quiet drama unfolding in the midst of ordinary life, a test of patience, strategy, and calm strength. The veteran moved through his days with discipline and awareness. He interacted politely with neighbors, maintained his routines, and continued documenting all interactions. He remained prepared for whatever Karen might attempt next, confident that his approach, calm, firm, and informed, would allow him to navigate future challenges successfully. Even as the sun set over the quiet streets, the veteran understood too.